I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. A simple acknowledgement, one that can go a long way. We have been led to believe that our government has been working hard to reconcile with Indigenous populations.
An opportunity to recognize the sadness, the anger, the frustration that is the legacy of intergenerational trauma.
Since the abolishment of the residential school system in the late 90s, land acknowledgements such as these are ways that we, as a country, could express our deepest regrets for our past actions. But the main question we must ask ourselves is it enough? The government has taken many steps in the right direction regarding truth and reconciliation.
We now recognize that in separating children from their families, we undermine the ability of many to adequately parent their own children and sow the seeds for generations to follow. And we apologize.
But other times, it is veered off course. We will discuss 3 things over the course of this video. How is the Canadian government reconciling with Indigenous communities? What are they severely doing wrong? What could they do in the future? The government has taken many steps towards reconciling with the Indigenous peoples, including the creation of Truth and Reconciliation Day. Established in 2019 through Bill C-369, it is a pivotal moment in Canada's healing journey. Introduced by MP Georgina Yolibois, a former residential school student, the day, observed on September 30th, acknowledges the impact of the residential school system, born out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's findings from 2008 to 2015. This day fosters reflection, education, and commemoration. It is observed they're wearing an orange shirt, a symbol of the Indigenous population stripping away of culture and freedom. Furthermore, the government has allowed for the creation of many health lines, including the Wellness Health Line, a mental health line dedicated to survivors of the residential school system, as well as their families. This initiative allows counseling and support services, recognizing the importance of mental well-being in the journey of reconciliation. In addition, the Canadian government initiated the Residential Schools Missing Children Community Support Fund, which addresses the lasting impacts of residential schools. Intended for Indigenous communities and partners, this fund supports initiatives related to the burial sites of the 145 schools across Canada. This fund showcases the government's commitment to funding community-led efforts in locating and researching burial sites associated with Canada's residential school system. While the government has taken a lot of steps towards reconciliation, there is still a lot that still needs to be improved. The most glaring issue is the speed at which the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to actions are being implemented. According to the Yellowhead Institute, an Indigenous-led research and education center based in Toronto, only 2 calls to action were acted on in 2022. To put this into perspective, in total, 13 calls have been completed. At this rate, it will take 42 years, or until 2065, to complete all the calls to action. The recommendations outlined by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission are fundamental in fostering a future of acceptance and diversity. Canada's slow pace in addressing them questions the Canadian government's commitment to meaningful change. Another glaring issue is the representation of Indigenous people within Canadian politics, specifically in upper government positions. Only 2 individuals of Indigenous descent have ever served as Premier, both in Manitoba. The first was around the time of Canada's declaration as an independent country, John Norquay, serving from 1878 to 1887, and the second was much more recent, Webb Kinnew, who has been serving since October 3rd of this year. Furthermore, only 3.3% of the MPs in the House of Commons are of Indigenous descent, which is low considering that they make up around 5% of the Canadian population. It is clear that our government needs to do more and that it is going to fail to do that at its current pace. A significant step Canada could take is implementing additional calls to action outlined by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This may seem daunting, but tackling some of the more straightforward recommendations, such as number 3 and 40, can make the task simpler. Call to Action 3 urges all levels of government to implement Jordan's Principle, which means ensuring equitable access to services for Indigenous children. This encompasses areas such as health, education, and social services. Call to Action 40 calls for all levels of government to create adequately funded and accessible Aboriginal-specific victim programs and services, along with appropriate evaluation mechanisms. A significant, albeit more drastic, change that the Canadian government could make is reforming the Indian Act. The Indian Act is a controversial piece of Canadian law, its name alone having roots in racist colonial history. It was introduced at first as a way of organizing the Indigenous population since Canada's conception. It was a part of the cultural genocide that the residential school system caused, and today it functions as a way to organize funding, services, and the reserve system. While not as bad today as it was before, it still fundamentally decides what happens to the Indigenous population and strips them away of autonomy. A reformed Indian Act would give that power to the Indigenous people. It would allow them to organize themselves and provide decision-making authority on their education, healthcare, and their police/fire departments. A model that could be implemented within Indigenous reserves may be similar to the self-governance model seen in the USA, where individual states govern themselves but are still part of a larger government. Canada's path to truth and reconciliation demands a nuanced and precise approach. While some changes have been made through initiatives such as Orange Shirt Day, there are still critical challenges to be faced, such as the speed at which the calls to action are implemented. By confronting the past and prioritizing the voices of Indigenous communities, Canada can head towards a future of mutual respect and cultural recognition.